Impact of Influence, the Murdaugh family murders. This is the unfolding story of a powerful South Carolina family, the mysterious deaths they are linked to, and our quest to bring you the truth. Hello, friend. Matt Harris and Seton Tucker. As always, super grateful that you've been spending time with us over the last couple of years. We're still amazed by it, and we still love hearing feedback as we try to get better at this each and every time. How can they find us, Seton?
You can find us on our Facebook page, which is Impact of Influence. I still always want to say Murdaugh Family Murders,
right,
but it is Impact of Influence now.
And our other podcast is the Wicked South podcast, so check that out. We do with Michael DeWitt. The final major piece in the Murdaugh saga is the boat crash that killed Mallory Beach. And it appears that all parties have signed off on the settlement. And we're going to talk to Connor Cook's attorney in just a second. It was supposed to go to court like in August, right?
I believe August 14th.
But now that appears like it's not going to happen. There's a few, things that have to be signed and that sort of deal. But it looks like we're close.
We're close, but there is still a pending lawsuit that Mark Tinsley has against Parker, which is a civil conspiracy, civil outrage lawsuit.
And that could get very interesting as well. And of course, there's still pending charges with cousin Eddie and Alec Murdaugh about drugs and about where did all the money go, that sort of thing. So that all can continue to happen, and we will keep you up to date on that as well. And now with us, Joseph M. McCullough Jr., seasoned litigator, former prosecutor, over 40 years of experience. He is also the founder of Palmetto Innocence, marshaling the assistance of volunteer lawyers in an effort to exonerate those wrongly convicted. And like every other player in the whole Murdaugh thing, he went to USC Law School. Joe, hi, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. I appreciate you saying I'm seasoned. There were some who would say I'm marinated.
Well, people would probably recognize Joe, to set this up a little bit. If you watch the trial, you saw the gray fox back there.
The hair. We received a lot of comments of who is the guy with the hair.
That's Joe. And you did all the talk, all the rounds in the court TV. He was on with me a couple times with Vinny and those sort of things. So, and he's friendly with the attorneys involved in the Murdaugh case. So I learned stuff from Joe while we were down there.
I did too. Before we get into the nitty gritty of what we're going to talk about today, did you know your hair was going to be such a hit?
Not really, but I generally picked that seat because it was strategic, because it allowed me the possibility of seeing the monitors that nobody was supposed to see, and one thing led to the other, and it became a proprietary seat that the press enjoyed sitting around, and I was very happy to be a resource for the press corps in terms of what in the hell just happened is kind of what we did all day. And my wife from time to time would send me a text message and say, for God's sakes, quit reacting because we can read your lips. And so, I mean, it was quite the experience. But no, I have hair. It's a tribute to my father being a beauty and barber supply salesman. So growing up, I had good product, we say. And, I thought Donald Trump was the hair, so I'm glad to take that away from him.
Yeah, you got that going for you. We were out with a couple people last night, and we were like, Joe, which one? Like, we started describing you, and once we got to the hair, like, oh, yeah, I know that guy. But yeah, Joe was very nice to share his thoughts with the media as things were going on, and that was fantastic.
Well, Matt, can I say this? Yeah. You mentioned earlier in the intro that I know and have relationships with the lawyers on both sides of this case, and actually some of the litigants, obviously. And I tried throughout to be, I'd like to call it an honest broker of the process and my opinions. But obviously, I've known these prosecutors. I've worked with some of them as a prosecutor, which I am a former prosecutor. I've been law partners with Dick Harpootlian. I've tried cases against him, criminal and civil cases. I've tried cases with him. So, I mean, I brought to the table, I thought, a kind of an omniscience and an interconnection with all, and a relationship with all these people. So, you know, some days I would go over and have coffee with the prosecution team, and in the evenings I'd have a drink or dinner with the defense team. And throughout the day, I would be interacting with all of them and reflecting. And you know, it was a very interesting busman's holiday for me, and I think a real opportunity for me to have the opportunity to give my opinion. So hopefully that was helpful.
It was helpful. And let's stay on that for just a second. When you were talking with both sides, did you sense at any point that the stress levels went up? Were there situations where you're like, this, I can tell this guy or this side is on edge? Did you see that from these guys?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Constantly. But, you know, lawyers in preparing for a trial, you know, we're strung tighter than a bowstring. And things get brittle because of the pressure of that oncoming train. And you want to perform your best for your client, whether your client is the state of South Carolina or you know, an individual. And then it never helps to add the glare of cameras and national and international attention, as it turned out. So I mean, all of that plays on the emotions of the litigants, the lawyers, the witnesses, and you know, in this case in particular. So yeah, I would talk about the people with these folks about the rigors of the trial, and as it dragged into the fourth week, and people began to become despondent that the damn thing was never going to end. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. There were a lot of emotions and days that it went one way for the prosecution. The next day, it went the other way for the defense. And of course, ruling by the Judge Newman dashed some hopes, but I have to say that I don't think the defense, they were not surprised by the results of many of their motions and arguments.
Well, let's stay, since we're on that part of the thing, let's stay with the whole Murdaugh thing for a moment. Did you find when you were saying that the defense had a good day, that people would say, you know, you're in the bag for them, that sort of thing? Did people give you heat whenever you said that side had a good day?
You know, I don't think I was in an echo chamber, but I don't recall being criticized for saying somebody had a good day, no matter who it was. The defense crowd, apparently, I will say, Matt, everybody, all the litigants were watching television in the evenings. So they knew what the commentators, such as myself, were saying about the trial and about people's performances. But, you know, I didn't really care. I was, again, trying to be an honest broker of my perceptions as a guy who's been a prosecutor, a trial lawyer, not just a paper lawyer, for almost, well, more than 4.5 decades. 46. I'm in my 46th year, and I've tried hundreds, if not 1,000+ cases. And I think my instincts and my impressions were sound. And, you know, clearly I'm not omniscient, because I predicted a hung jury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
I thought that too. What did you think was the biggest turning point in the trial?
The worm turned substantially against the defense, with the prosecution bringing to full closure the value of the kennel video, which placed Alec there close in time, a fact about which the prosecution had previously established that he had denied being present. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that created one hell of a dilemma for the defense. Under normal circumstances, as everybody has said repeatedly, you try not to put your defendant on the stand. That typically doesn't go well. I think there were dynamics probably backstage on the defense team that not only did that video create a real problem that only Alec could answer, but I think it also may have had something to do with Alec Murdaugh's career as a lawyer and his self-confidence, which may have been misplaced in hindsight. But I think he wanted to testify, believing genuinely that he could influence and persuade the jury in his direction with an explanation. But absent an explanation, it was going to be a hard result.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I've been talking about getting on the podcast for over a year now, I guess, and you've shared some great insight and emails and conversations. But we finally get you on because one of your cases has wrapped.
Yes, we have the Mallory Beach boating crash death lawsuit, and there have been reports this week that there was an $18.5 million settlement. Joe, can you break down who receives what and how this came about?
And by the way, we should mention Joe is Connor Cook's attorney.
That is correct. Connor being the courageous young man who was not driving the boat at the time of the accident, but was the young man whose jaw was broken in multiple places. He sustained a terrible gash wound to his face, knocked him out. When he came to, there were people in the water screaming. There were people in the boat screaming. He had the presence of mind to find his cell phone, put a hand on his cheek to keep from bleeding out, and to stumble up to the top of the bridge to find a cell signal, and then talk the 911 person into, to their location. So, I mean, that young man deserves kudos for courage and composure in the worst of circumstances, knowing his childhood friend Mallory Beach was missing. So, it is correct that the Beach case and there's what's being described in the last day or so, a wrinkle in the resolution of the Alec Murdaugh case, and we can come back to that. But on Saturday, conversations coalesced with the Parker's convenience store platoon of lawyers, and we had a very a great mediator, Carl Folkens. And we all agreed Saturday afternoon to meet first thing Sunday morning in Daniel Island to see if we could reach a common compromise. And after many hours, we were able to do so. Now, the rules of ethics say that I can't describe the process, so I can't tell you about sawing the log, but I can tell you the result. And the result was a settlement of about $18.5 million. Some smaller portion of that was to be paid by the Murdaugh Insurance Company. And because they were not present at the mediation, we've got some what I'll call nuances to work out. And we've been discussing those for the last 2 days. I'm very optimistic that both the cases, Mr. Tinsley's case on behalf of the Beaches and on behalf of Molly Altman and Morgan Dowdy, who he represents the estate in those two young ladies who were in the boat, and Patrick Carr and I represent the Cook cousins. And essentially, as has been reported, about $15 million is going to be paid to the Beach family, to the estate. $1 million to be paid to Connor Cook for his injuries, only because it's a private matter, unless the lawyers want to talk about it. But yes, the everyone in the boat receives funds, and I suspect it's all out in the public domain. But because I haven't had time to read the paper, because I've been on the phone perpetually to put the final kiss on this settlement, I haven't had time to read the papers. But the Parker's convenience part of this is settled completely, I believe, and I think we'll work the other $1.5 million out here shortly.
Parker's insurance is paying that 18 mil?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the other is going to come from Alec Murdaugh's insurance?
Boat insurance,
It's from his boat insurance policy. And that the the insurance company in Mr. Murdaugh's insurance company they had proffered those funds probably 3 years ago. It just didn't make logistical and legal sense to take that money at that time. But it did when we resolved matters with Parker's. So, we'll get this other part worked out, I hope, I believe, and put a bow on this thing and be done with it, much to the chagrin of the media and all the, I'm beginning to call them trolls, those people in the social posting sphere who have said horrible things about various people. And I don't know what some of the lawyers involved in this who have made careers out of promoting this case. I don't know what the hell they're going to do for a second act.
Well, let's talk about the rulings that kind of led up to what we thought was going to be a hearing in August. Judge Hall ruled that the change of venue it was going to stay in Hampton, and also that Parker's was going to be tied to Murdaugh. I guess they wanted to separate. Do you think that these two rulings influenced the settlement?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I mean, what we on the plaintiff side saw was a kind of a frenzied filing of motions. The venue motion and the severance motion were not only filed and denied, motions for reconsideration filed and denied, but then they took the Parker's legal team took another shot at filing essentially the same motions with very little new information, and those were summarily denied. So I think the failures of those motions were like dominoes falling and really pressed the Parker's legal team, perhaps, but more so the insurers, to really come to the table. I will also say that I had filed a motion that had not been heard. Was scheduled actually to be heard Monday of this week. It was a motion in limine to ask the judge to rule that the failure of SLED to not charge Parker's with a criminal offense of selling to underage people and not to sanction them administratively was inadmissible at trial. If they had issued a ticket, that would have been inadmissible at trial. And my argument about that in the motion, which is a matter of record and filed, was that Parker's had, for the last year, kept beating the drum with a mantra that SLED's inaction was exonerative, that it vindicated their sale. And that was never our position. Our position was steadfast as announced in the pleadings, and would have been the argument in the trial of the case. But we were hopeful to have that hearing, that heard. And, I didn't get to argue that, darn it. And then we were supposed to take Alec Murdaugh's deposition yesterday at his correctional residence. And we didn't get to do that either. And darn it, I was looking forward to that.
What would you would be trying to get out of Alec if you had been able to pull that off?
Well, I think certainly we would have wanted to talk about the child rearing in his family and the involvement of Paul in this boat accident. I mean, the cause of action against Alec Murdaugh in this case that we believe or hope has just been settled was based upon the negligent entrustment of a boat to a son who had some history of connection with alcohol, if not abuse of alcohol, and just, the parental failure is what we alleged of allowing him free rein to consume alcohol. And so we would have gotten into all of that and probably have questioned him on his knowledge of the convenience store location and whether alcohol was obtained there by his son, Paul, and what the reputation of that store was in the community or in that community, because that that store happens to be the closest Parker's to Chichesi, where the boat ride began. But, we'll just never have, well, I don't think we'll have that opportunity.
Gifting is hard. This isn't news. But what might be news is that you can now send beer, wine, and spirits right to your friends and family with Drizzly, the go-to app for alcohol delivery.
That's good news, because adult beverages are the only gift that no one ever returns. Love it. And Drizzly's tailored experience lets you find the perfect drink for the occasion, no matter what it is.
You'll save time by shopping a huge selection of drinks from wherever you are.
You'll save money by comparing prices on said drinks across stores, and you'll get to spend more time sipping with your giftees, if they're the sharing type.
Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com. And get your favorite drinks delivered today.
Ding dong! Hello, friend. It's Drizzly! Must be 21 or over. Not available in all locations.
Mark Tinsley gave some quotes to ABC News 4, and in some of his quotes, he talks about Greg Parker's ego. And, we know this has taken a long time for y'all to get this resolution. Do you think Greg Parker's ego played a part in why it's taken so long to reach an agreement?
Well, I don't personally know Greg Parker. I've met him. We have mutual friends, or friends in common, I will say. And I don't know that I would ascribe it to ego. I would ascribe it to a very obvious frustration that Greg Parker has with the state of the law in the area of dram shop. And I will say that I am a lawyer who I'm involved in representing plaintiffs, as in this instance, in all kinds of cases, car wrecks and slips and falls and all types of civil personal injury cases. And I have made a substantial amount of money off of dram shop cases as a plaintiff and enjoyed the state of the law. But I have to say, in my alter ego legal practice, I represent bars and restaurants. We really don't have bars in South Carolina. We only have restaurants that serve alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But I have represented a lot of restaurants that I think were sued wrongly, but insurance companies recognize the law is to a degree skewed in favor of plaintiffs. And the insurance companies, unfortunately, are leaving South Carolina because of this law. So I understand Mr. Parker's frustration about the law, and the challenge for him and for my other clients when I've got my defense hat on for restaurants in dram shop cases is whether there's any possibility of changing the law to make it a fair fight. And I feel Greg Parker's pain. I think that frustration is what prevented resolution of this thing. And I'd love to talk to him about that frustration and about the law. I'll issue that open challenge to him to give me a call.
That's the joint and several liability law, that if somebody involved is even 1%, they can be held responsible for 100% of
correct.
Okay.
And well, it's the fact, Matt, that our law exempts or accepts, I guess is a better way to say, it takes out of comparative negligence any civil case that is based upon the service of alcohol.
Okay.
And this it's hard to explain it, I guess, but I will say that if you think of owning a restaurant at which someone purchases one drink at 1 o'clock in the day, then goes on to another couple of establishments, and then really ties one on, and gets drunk at number 2 or number 3, it is under this law feasible, and it is trotted out almost daily in lawsuits across the state of South Carolina, that everybody in the daisy chain gets sued. And it is conceivable that if a verdict is found by a jury against all 3 defendants, And that first defendant who served only one drink and has, you know, more insurance than the other two, that's the target for seeking your judgment satisfaction. So that's the unfairness that I think Mr. Parker's frustration arises from. And you know, there are some ways to adjust the law that would not deprive plaintiffs injured by drunk drivers or drunk boaters or whatever, that would just make it a fairer fight, a more reasonable exercise in court, and not tilt the table quite so much in the direction of you know, the
Deep
plaintiff.
pockets.
But in this case, the Paul Murdaugh, as the evidence would have shown, became drunk in almost entirely, if not entirely, on beer purchased by Paul Murdaugh underage, through a little bit of fakery, but it was our position that it could have been avoided by a more diligent effort by the clerk at the time. So this is not a multiple stop situation. Now, some comments have been made about, you know, the two shots at the end of the evening that Paul required and that Connor accompanied him in for. But I think that the testimony at trial would have been from Connor that if he had not gone in with Paul, they would have all been standing on that dock for the rest of the night. And that, you know, gosh, Paul was intent on having a nightcap, as they say. And I think that Connor recognized and would have testified that Paul bought a round of a shot for each of them, or they split a shot, and that he then knew that if he didn't reciprocate, they wouldn't get out of there. So he did that. But I would say that experts were ready, as common sense would dictate, that after Paul had consumed a case of beer or more that day over the preceding hours, that half a shot was a drop in the bucket. It didn't have anything to do, and that would have been our position at the trial, that it didn't affect Paul's intoxication level whatsoever, that was a function of the beer purchased underage.
We've seen all these documentaries, we've seen HBO, Netflix. How do you think the notoriety has impacted this case?
Gosh, it's made media stars out of some people. It's making some lawyers money as commentators, I reckon. It has given my hair an outing. You know, I have to say, I may have had more hair fall out over this case than I've benefited by it. It has brought to prominence this tort law issue that Mr. Parker is so frustrated about. It has brought to great notoriety the Murdaugh family, unfortunately for some, and appropriately for others. And it's really cast a pall over Hampton and Colleton counties, I think, in a way that they have financially benefited for, but I think they've paid an emotional price with all the negative attention. And so the settlement is a really good thing, because not only does it allow Connor and Miley and their brand new 2-month-old baby.
Well, I was just about to ask you about that.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
To now begin to put all this behind them and kind of recede back into the fabric of Hampton County without having to worry about this stuff every day. And I think it to some extent, it's a relief to the folks that live in Hampton and Colleton, except the people that were getting ready to rent all their Airbnbs out for the trial that's now not going to occur. But,
True.
But I think, you know, I was in France on a much deserved vacation.
Mm-hmm.
My wife got a pitchfork out after me and said, "We're out of here. We're going to, you know, take a vacation." Took my family and met with one of the journalists in Paris, who is a Parisian who was spent 6 weeks sitting next to me, Arthur.
Yeah, he was awesome.
So Arthur and I had drinks over there, and of course, you know, this case is famous over there.
Well, do you think it impacted the amount of settlement in any way? Do you think they got more or less because of the notoriety?
No, I don't. I don't think that had much to do with the numbers. I think the significance of the negligence that we alleged, we believe could have been easily, or not easily, but would have been laboriously proven, but nonetheless proven. And I think the death of Mallory Beach, a terrible thing, the effect on the families and some of the other collateral issues, the uh, alleged improprieties of Alec at the time, the night of the boat accident, and some other things, the failures of law enforcement, all of that brought a spotlight to the case internationally and certainly nationally. So, but I don't think that had a hell of a lot to do with the size of the settlement.
You,
I
you,
really don't.
you mentioned a Murdaugh wrinkle earlier. What is the wrinkle?
Without getting into the gory details, the uh, insurance company that holds the insurance for the boat, that was the boat insured and owned by Alec Murdaugh and driven by Paul Murdaugh, um, was, and thereby being the platform for the injury. The company, my understanding my recollection is that they had essentially proffered that 500,000 several years ago. When this mediation was put together at the last second for reasons of urgency, they were not able to be included. So we just got to work out a couple of fine details.
Okay.
But I think in spirit and in principle, the company has acknowledged their willingness to pay the money. We've just got to fine tune the terms of accepting the funds.
The most important thing is, when you were in France, did you wear one of those little tiny Speedos?
No.
I did not, Matt, and that's a horrible image for me and for your viewers if they know me. But no, I will say we spent some days in Paris and watched the news and never saw any of the protests. Unfortunately, they were occurring seating right outside of Arthur's window
Oh,
because
wow.
he happened to live and lives in that neighborhood that was a focal point of the riots, and sent me a photograph of it. So he had a front row seat for the riots. We never saw anything, and then we went on to Normandy to honor the servicemen. Awesome. And I did not think to take a Speedo there.
Well, speaking of images, I wanted to ask you before we let you go if you have an opinion. We've seen some new images of Alec Murdaugh logging into his prison tablet, and they're all over the internet. And we've also heard a phone call between Alec and Buster. Do you have any opinions on whether you think this should be public information?
I knew Alec. I knew his father fondly and his grandfather. Every day I get out of bed and I'm either defending or suing or assisting in the prosecution of some criminally accused person, or I'm defending them. So I have a certain sympathy for the Murdaugh family and even for Alec Murdaugh. So do I think that those kind of unflattering photographs of him should be news? No, I don't. And do I think that phone calls between a person incarcerated and the family, I have never thought that those phone calls should be public matters, nor do I think they should be available to the prosecution. And, prosecutors always subpoena they don't have to subpoena them. They just call around the corner and say, send me all the phone calls with the defendant and his mother and his brother and whoever, and we can see if there's anything in there we can use to beat them over the head with. I don't have to think that's proper. So, maybe the settlement of these cases, if we can finally get it done and put that proverbial bow on them, will allow the Murdaughs to reclaim some of their privacy and some of their sanctity as well.
Joe, appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and I'm glad we finally got to connect on the podcast after talking all this time. You are a genuine fella. We love chatting with you, man. Appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it, and feel free to call me. God, every time I pick up the newspaper, there is a new and fascinating case out there.
Oh, yeah. We would love to have you on as one of our experts. That'd be awesome.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Later, Joe.
Happy to do it. See you guys.
Bye. All right, couple of few emails actually from Matt Harris podcast at gmail.com. From Ruby, it is difficult for me to believe that every email, except attorneys, that Murdaugh receives can be read by anyone. I just don't understand that. And you talk more about the issue we just did with Joe. He's against that. She said, I wonder, can you write a letter to inmates and it also be available to the public, even though they are prisoners, seems invasive to me. Love your podcast. Want more. And join the new pod with DeWitt, which is the Wicked South podcast. And Ruby bought DeWitt's book. So as far as we know, unless something changes, Freedom of Information Act can get you all the things you need.
Well, yeah, but actually the South Carolina Department of Corrections issued a statement yesterday, and in that they say these images that are taken when you open your prison tablet are no longer considered public.
Oh, that's right. You're correct. I forgot about that part. I was thinking about the phone calls are still...
They're still fair game, which I tend to agree with what Joe said. And
the emails, I think, are too, right? Because that's how we know that the people wrote letters to him about love.
I believe he's still receiving love letters.
Yeah. From Tammy, hi, Matt and Seaton. Thanks for your informative episodes and your great guest. Money laundering episode really had my attention. No wonder such badness can go on so easily. Until then, if y'all interested, I've got another story to tell you. Ooh. Well, I'll get in touch with her and find out what the story is. And from Michael, finally. Good afternoon. I hope this email finds you both well. I listened to your podcast from the beginning, and I'm a fan of your work. Last Friday, I was listening to the trailer when I heard Seaton mention something about the Gold Club / Hilton Head. I had a good laugh with my wife because I reminded her that I worked at the club during the summer of '91. Parking cars, nothing else. I was in between my first and second year of grad school when I decided to mooch a place to stay from a friend. Anyway, I ran out of money and was planning on returning to Columbia or North Augusta, his hometown. One of my buddies suggested I get a job for 2 weeks. Parking cars at the Gold Club. Love your new pod. And that's from the Wicked South podcast.
Yes.
We talked about the Gold Club. And so you have to check out those episodes that are available now, wherever you get your favorite podcast. And again, feel free to reach out to us by that email I said, or
our Facebook page, which is Impact of Influence.
And listen to the Wicked South podcast, also a Facebook page for that we do with Michael DeWitt. We crank out those weekly as well. And we'll talk soon, friend.